Greetings, everyone, from Atlanta, Georgia. I think you want to switch to me, switch to my face. We're here in Atlanta, Georgia, broadcasting from the Carter Center. And my name is Karen Ryan. I am the Senior Advisor for Human Rights here at the Carter Center, and we are so excited today to have a panel of fantastic experts who are going to talk to us about this question: are women equal under the law in the United States? So that's the quiz for all of our audience. Do you believe that women are equal under the law in the United States? And it turns out that most people, and 96% of U.S. adults, believed male and female citizens should have equal rights. And they actually, most of those actually believe that we are equal under the law. And what we're going to learn today is that that actually is not true. And our experts are going to tell us why. But at the very beginning, I want to talk about the Carter Center's interest and commitment to this. Former President Jimmy Carter, when he was President of the United States, took a very strong position in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. As President, this is what he said. He wrote a letter to the House Judiciary Committee, and he said, this is in 1978, he said, the Equal Rights Amendment is a long overdue addition to our Constitution. It will guarantee equal rights for all Americans regardless of sex. I am hopeful that the ERA will be ratified before the present deadline expires, and that was back in 1978. They had to actually take action to extend the deadline. We got very close to amending passing the amendment to the Constitution, and we're going to hear about all of that drama a little later from our panelists. President Carter wrote a book last year, and I'm going to hold it up for you, A Call to Action: Women, Religion, Violence, and Power. And in this book, President Carter writes about many issues facing women and equality under the law, and globally, here in the United States, equality under the law, and globally, what women are facing in terms of the fight for equality. So I recommend the book, but in today's conversations, we're going to focus on this really exciting fact that we have a brand new movement being brought forward by a whole new generation of leaders, combining with a lot of the women who were involved in the 1970s push for the ERA. So it's a very exciting time. So let me introduce our speakers. We have Dr. Faye Williams, who is the National President of the Congress of Black Women. I'm going to let you all read their amazing bios online so we can get through these quickly. And we also have Kamala Lopez, who is the director of a very exciting new film that you're all going to have to see, the film is called Equal Means Equal, the title of today's roundtable. It is an upcoming documentary about the status of women in the United States. She's going to talk to us about that project today. And Jessica Neuwirth, who is the president of the ERA Coalition. How lucky are we to have this amazing panel today? So I'm going to start right away with this question. Give us examples to each of our panelists. I'm going to start with Jessica Neuwirth. How will the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, if we pass it in the United States, how will it help women? Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely, thank you. Well, I think, as you said, most people mistakenly think we have legal protection under the Constitution and equality, and actually we don't. There's really no constitutional framework, so there are many, many different ways in which women who have suffered all kinds of inequality have tried to get justice and not been able to. And the one I would just start with maybe is violence against women, because that's something that's just so deadly, takes lives, and there are just some horrendous cases. And one that I want to mention today is the case of Christy Bronchalla, which dates back to the mid-1990s. Christy Bronchalla was a young woman who entered Virginia Polytechnic Institute, and her case was a sexual assault case that really reads like any case you could see today. She was raped by 2 varsity football players within the first month of her arriving at college, and she tried to get some justice. Initially, there was a suspension of the football players, but behind her back, the suspension was overturned, even though one of the football players, James Morrison, did say and openly confessed that he did have sex with her without her consent, even though she said no twice. There was no way she was able to get justice at the state level, so she brought an action in the federal court against these two young men and the university that had denied her justice. And just at the same time, in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act was passed by Congress, which is what allowed her to do that. It had a provision that said that if you're subject to gender-based violence, you can take your case to federal court. Well, hers was one of the first cases, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, where it was thrown out because the Supreme Court said there was no constitutional basis for that provision of the law, the Violence Against Women Act, that would allow women to go to court in federal court. And really what they looked at, for people who are a little bit familiar with the Constitution, is the Commerce Clause. A lot of these protections that we think come from the 14th Amendment really don't. They come from the Commerce Clause, and the judges said, well, that's not commerce. There's really nothing in the Constitution that justifies this kind of federal law. So her case was thrown out, and that was more than 30 years ago.
Jessica, so, can you explain about the 14th Amendment for the average viewer here that might want to make a connection, and maybe if you could look up it so we could.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah. The 14th Amendment. I think when people think that we have equality under the law, they're often thinking about the 14th Amendment. Mm-hmm. But the 14th Amendment has never really worked for women in terms of equality. It was originally passed after the Civil War as part of ending slavery, but it took another 50 years for women to get the vote, which didn't come until 1920, and it came with another constitutional amendment, 20th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment couldn't even get women the right to vote, and there were many other cases that were thrown out under the 14th Amendment. It wasn't until the 1970s that the first case for women came under the 14th Amendment, and it's been very limited in terms of what kind of protection it will give to women. So, for example, it is very limited to state action. Anything outside the scope of state action is considered outside the scope of the 14th Amendment. So if a university does something, or if two boys in a university do something, that's considered outside the scope of the 14th Amendment. And most of our protections, like the Civil Rights Act, don't fall under the 14th Amendment. They fall under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, which has been stretched tremendously because people want to have these protections. And it has really covered all kinds of protections. But when it came to women and violence against women, the Supreme Court said the Commerce Clause stops here. And so it wasn't considered commerce, even though when the Violence Against Women Act was passed, they did quite a lot of documentation about the impact on interstate commerce of violence against women, which we all know is tremendous. But that's the legal framework we're operating in. It's awkward. We have to constantly try to elbow in protection for women. And the ERA is simple and straightforward and would certainly provide a constitutional basis for legislation that would allow someone like Christy Bronkhalla to get to the court.
So if we had an Equal Rights Amendment, what would have been the path for her for in this case? Can you describe how that could work in a court case, and what would be the outcome of the court case if it went the way we would want it to go?
So this is the way I think the system should have worked. Her case, instead of being thrown out for a lack of constitutional basis, should have gone forward. She should have been allowed to bring her case. She had very strong evidence. She had a young man who said himself that he had sex with her even though she said no twice. So she should have won that case. And if she had won that case, that would have been a precedent 20, 30 years ago that hopefully would have led to further precedents and a sense of accountability, because right now we're dealing with a climate of total impunity for sexual violence, and in particular sexual violence on campus. So if 30 years ago we had had a case that actually held someone accountable, 30 years later, we might not be facing, or we probably wouldn't be facing, this kind of epidemic of sexual violence on campus.
That's right, because you would have, first of all, there would be probably a greater awareness of the consequences, the liability that you're facing if you were convicted of a crime like that, and people would feel empowered to bring cases. You know, that's a great example, because here we are just inundated with stories about sexual assault in every sphere, especially on college campuses. So that's a great example. So Kamala, let's talk to us about what you found in your, as you were putting this film together. In the trailer, and I want to tell everyone who's watching, in the trailer for the film is on. We're going to post a blog post that has all the related content from this discussion, and there's a trailer there for Equal Means Equal, Kamala's film. and you have all these little issues that come up in bubbles, you know, sexual assault, pay equity, etc. So give us some examples. Okay, everybody take your phones off the hook so that we have somebody's got a phone ringing. Does someone have a phone ringing they can take off the hook? No? I hear a phone ringing.
Mine are all unplugged.
Okay, that's strange. Okay, we're going to talk right through it. Camilla, can you tell us what did you find in the in your film as you were going through your project?
I'm an example of a typical American who had no idea that this was the case. I really thought that we were equal. I thought we had equal rights under the law. I thought we had equal protection under the Constitution. And so when I started to dig deeper and find out things like the fact that they failed to test seatbelts on women's body frames, we did all of our testing for seatbelt safety on male crash dummies, and it turns out that male dummies respond differently in a car accident with seatbelts than females, and now women are being injured and killed from these seatbelts. Same thing with the rats. I mean, they didn't want to give us female rats to test medicines on, so now some of the medicines that we're using that were tested solely on male rats are turning out to have adverse effects on women, and now women are suffering from heart disease. It's the biggest killer of women right now. And so there are a lot of issues where, especially, you know, in case after case in the film, we look at how the Supreme Court is unable to point to something in the Constitution to give us those basic protections. I even feel like sometimes they would love to, but they don't have the ability. And that's what I feel like the ERA might give them. I mean, in the case that Jessica was talking about, Christy Brancala, and the fact that there is no civil rights protection for rape, that leads to these astounding statistics. Something between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 young women are now being assaulted on campuses. So if the film looks at 12 different subject areas and analyzes whether in each case the Equal Rights Amendment would improve that particular issue, and in every single area we found that it would. Obviously it wouldn't be overnight, you know, but without it, I think that what we are seeing will only continue and get worse. And the erosion of these rights, like Jessica says, if there was something simple to point to, but there isn't. So we're always being sort of shoved into weird spots, because in 1787, women didn't have any rights at all. We were chattel. We were property. So why they think that they shouldn't change that now is somewhat astonishing.
Yes, that just amazed me when you told that story about the seatbelts, because and if we had the Equal Rights Amendment, we would have then car companies would have been required. Is that right? That's correct. And in all science right now, there is no requirement for them to test on both genders. In fact, in breast cancer, they didn't test on men, and men do get breast cancer. So it's not really a women's right amendment. It's an equal rights amendment. That's right. Because men would benefit greatly from having this in place, especially when it comes to dealing with their children and their families. Yes. No, I think that's an excellent example. Dr. Faye Williams.
Oh, excuse me.
No, you're fine. Welcome, Dr. Faye Williams, to our program. And tell us about your work on this issue and how you think an Equal Rights Amendment will help women in this country.
You know, one of the things I think that men should understand is that the Equal Rights Amendment is not about taking rights away from men, but giving equal rights to women. Now, I serve as national president of a women's organization, and so often I have women coming to me thinking they have rights under the law, but in practice they do not. So we talk about it, we try to find remedies for it, and sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. I think the Equal Rights Amendment would clarify these ambiguities in the law, and women would feel safer, they would feel that they have more rights. You know, I think in terms of a niece that I have who played basketball in college,
Mm-hmm.
and she could run circles around men and other women with the three-point shot, but she never had a chance to play professional basketball. Now, of course, she went on to get her PhD, but she will never earn the kind of money that some of these men are earning who were drafted to be in the NBA or some of the other basketball leagues. And I'm sure there are a lot of women just like that. And then we take the little girl, Monet Davis, who gave new meaning to Play Like a Girl. I love Monet. I mean, she may never play professional baseball, but the point is she needs to have the opportunity to do it. And when women have the opportunity to do things, it means that they have justice, they have fairness, and that's what the Equal Rights Amendment is all about. I think men who have, well, they all have mothers, but those who have sisters, those who have daughters, I don't, and spouses, I don't see how they could not support the Equal Rights Amendment, because in the end, this, of course, says something positive about them and their daughters. They should want their daughters, they should want their sisters and their spouses to succeed, because it helps with the family fortune, as I always say.
Yeah.
It makes things easier on men rather than harder on men, because then they're working together. And I just simply believe when we have all of the people with equal rights, then we will have a much brighter world. We will see a lot more things happening. We will see a lot more cooperation, and we will be able to do things that ears have not heard and eyes have not seen. When we're using all of the intelligence, intelligence would be improved because we've got that other 52% working together. And I just see men and women having better cooperation when we have equal rights under the law.
And what's amazing to me is that you know, and as I was studying up for this, I realized how much I didn't know about how unequal it is. And you know, we have this idea that civil rights is civil rights. Everyone enjoys civil rights, women and men equally. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why is it that the civil rights protections that should, I know we've already talked about the 14th Amendment, but I think that we have to kind of drill this into our minds that this is not protecting women. You know, so why is it that we have these specific exclusions? What's going on there? Okay, we know there's bias. You know, if ever we've had ongoing conversations about bias in our society, racial bias, gender bias, it's all bubbling up right now. So I think it's a very rich time to talk about how these biases influence decisions, hiring decisions, pay decisions. You know, we just learned that the women of the World Cup that played in the World Cup got that the men in the men's World Cup got a 40 times higher payout. All the payouts that went to all the players in the men's World Cup was 40 times higher than the payouts to the women in the World Cup. You know, so Jessica, talk about that a little bit. I mean, what's going on there? How does that happen? Well, yeah, no, Dr. Faye, I guess Faye.
Before you go to Jessica on that, I wanted to mention that something. What is it about a team of men who lost and earned that much more than women, and they don't speak out on it? I haven't heard one man from that team say, that's not right, that's not fair, the women made us proud in America and they need to be paid equally. I mean, what is it about a man who can't stand up and say that? And I hope that somebody from that team will be challenged to do so.
Okay, I hear an action item coming out of this discussion. We're going to call on the men of the men's national team to make a statement about this. Jessica?
Yes.
Well, you know, I think it is outrageous, and I think I read that the women's final of the World Cup was more widely watched soccer match than any other in U.S. television history. So it's not an issue of advertising or any of these other things. It's really just a total devaluation of women in an enormous quantity. So why doesn't the civil rights legal framework work? Well, let me just take that as an example. Equal pay is a huge issue. We all know that on average women make 79 cents for every dollar a man makes, and it's much lower for women of color. I think many women have tried and still try to this day to get a remedy for that inequality. They're doing the exact same job and they're not getting the exact same pay. And that should be outlawed by the civil rights law framework. There's Equal Pay Act, there's Title VII. Those say equal pay for equal rights. But there are loopholes. So, for example, there's a loophole that says it's only applicable for factors. It's not applicable for factors other than sex. So what does factors other than sex mean? Well, the courts have interpreted other than sex to mean what you got paid in your last job. So imagine a woman gets paid less in every job. She goes to the next job, she tries to complain, and they're like, well, you got paid less in your last job. So that's a factor other than sex. Even if there's no other factor, it's not a question of experience. She might have more experience or the same experience. She still has no legal recourse because that is considered other than sex, the fact that she got paid less in her last job. But again, when you look at the soccer and you see that the advertising is probably greater revenue than any other sports soccer match, you know, there's really no justification, and yet there's no legal remedy. And again, that is a gap in our legal framework.
Yeah, so, okay, let's imagine a person, again, let's do this scenario, that if you go to court in order to enforce equal pay, the Equal Rights Amendment would help you how in a court of law? How would it help you, Jessica?
Well, you would go in there and you would say, I'm a global soccer star, and I'm doing the same exact work, and I'm getting 1/40th of the pay, and there should be a remedy for that, and the employer should be held accountable for that. You know, I think that's where people do try to do that under the current law, but they have all these loopholes. And the beauty of a constitutional amendment is there's no loophole. It's a basic statement of principle, and you know, there may be lots of different ways to get to equality, but I think the bottom line principle is we need to get there. And there should be remedies for women who suffer discrimination when we don't get there.
So, like for example, the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution is used very often in court cases. You know, sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it doesn't. Bush v. Gore, for example. But it's there. It's a principle that you can use, and if a court finds in your favor and looks at the merits of the case and says, yes, here is a violation of equal protection, that sets a precedent. It allows other cases to proceed under the same types of arguments and with using that principle, right? I mean,
let me just interrupt for a second, because it's really interesting that even in the equal protection framework you're talking about, there's still discrimination against women, because if you go under the 14th Amendment to the court with a law that discriminates against women, you're going to be dealing with a different standard than if you go to the court with a law that discriminates on the basis of race or religion. It's a different standard because women are considered quasi-protected category, and they just don't. It's a different, lower standard of review. So the court will look at the law in a different way, and there are other cases related to citizenship discrimination where if the court had used the higher standard that they use for other forms of discrimination, the case absolutely would have come out another way. But because it's a lower standard, you know, even under the 14th Amendment, women are getting lesser protection than other minority groups.
That's amazing. That's just amazing to me. Go ahead, Kamala.
I was just going to say that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does protect corporations, however, although it doesn't protect women. So what we're finding is that corporate people are more protected under our Constitution than female people. That's the conclusion that I reached during the filming.
Because can you give an example, Kamala, like one case?
In 1886, Southern Pacific Railways were given the status of persons under the law, and that gave them protections under this clause of the 14th Amendment. That's why right now people think that Citizens United is where corporations became people. No, they became people well in advance of us, because we're still not people, but they're people. And you know, that's why with Hobby Lobby, they could say that that Mr. Hobby Lobby had religious beliefs that were being upset by providing his female employees with birth control, because he's a person that has feelings, I guess, and he doesn't like birth control. I mean, it's just so absurd. What bothers me the most is that we all know this. We know this in our hearts and minds that this is wrong, that men and women are equal and should be equal under the law. And I don't understand why everybody tries to make it so complicated and try and get away with it when everybody knows that's America. We're all equal. We're all equal under the law. And that includes 160 million women.
And Faye?
Well, our current president has made an effort to make women more visible. He's put 2 on the United States Supreme Court, and I'm just waiting for the opportunity to see even more, because we know that women can see these inequalities because we have suffered them, and we didn't make up these laws that discriminate against anybody, so we're not prone to hold on to them. We'd be more apt to negotiate, to talk with one another and try to make a difference than people who made up these unfair laws and seemingly have a vested interest in them. So I'm just looking forward to our having some more women on the Supreme Court, some more women in Congress, some more women in all policy-making positions so that we can make a difference. We have to see people like us in order for us to believe that we can straighten out these problems, we can be what everyone else is, we could have the justice. I mean, just think, for example, about young people who are growing up now. They could be little white boys, and they would ask themselves, oh wow, can a white boy be president? Because they've never seen a white president other than on television. So we want the whole country to come to that point where it's not a surprise that a woman could be president, a man could be president, a woman can do a job, a man can do this job. It's not about that. It's about your abilities to be able to do it, what you've been trained to do, but not necessarily these false things that we use now to keep other people down. And I just see the Equal Rights Amendment as closing that gap and helping us to be more cooperative with one another, because we know that all of us have certain abilities and we're better off when we use all of our capabilities.
That's right. And I came across an amazing quote from Antonin Scalia, who is not a female member of the Supreme Court, obviously. You just said we have 3. We did have Sandra Day O'Connor, who, even though she's Republican, she is also very good on these issues. Mm-hmm. So I can say, there's a bipartisan awareness there. But this is what Scalia said in September 2010, that he does not think the Constitution prohibits sex discrimination.
Right.
So if Antonin Scalia says the Constitution does not prohibit sex discrimination, then I think we need an Equal Rights Amendment just to clear that up, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. He's our biggest ally. This guy, I love Scalia. He's my favorite Supreme Court justice. He tells it like it is. It's the truth. It's the truth. He said, if you wanted something else, you better vote for that. He's telling us to do it. So, okay, Scalia.
So bumper sticker. That sounds like a bumper sticker to me. Go ahead, Jessica.
Well, I just wanted to come back to the Hobby Lobby case, because I think it's just another great example of how the ERA is needed and can make a difference. In that decision, it was really all about the religious rights of the employer, and there was very little or no consideration given to the impact on the women employees of that company who were going to be denied access to contraceptives. And I think that if you look at that decision, there's not a single place in the entire decision where the word discrimination appears, and yet we know that denying women contraceptives is causes tremendous forms of discrimination across the board. So I think, again, if we have the ERA, there would be a constitutional principle that when they're looking at this religious law that protects religious freedom, they would have to measure it against a principle in the Constitution that laws cannot discriminate against women. And if that law is going to have a discriminatory impact, the way they're interpreting it, that would have had to have been addressed by the Supreme Court, because it would have been a constitutional principle.
Okay, good. So we all agree we need the Equal Rights Amendment. Let's talk about how we get there. What are the mechanics of how we get there? So Jessica, talk us through the steps. And we'll in a minute we'll get to a little bit of the history, or actually start with the history, Jessica. Just give us a little bit of the history of the 70s, why it failed, so what it means now. Well, why did it fail then, and what does it mean now about how we get there?
Well, I can throw that together a little bit. The way a constitutional amendment process works any constitutional amendment has to be approved by a 2/3 vote of each house of Congress, and then it gets sent to the states for ratification. And the requirement is that 3/4 of the states vote at the state level to ratify the amendment. So that's 38 states. In 1972, 2/3 of Congress voted the Equal Rights Amendment, and it was sent to the states with a 7-year deadline for ratification.
And this was obviously a bipartisan Congress, right? There was bipartisan support.
There was always bipartisan support for the ERA in the 1970s. Of the 6 presidents, in fact, including President Carter, 3 were Republicans and 3 were Democrats who publicly endorsed the ERA. So it went to the states, and there was initially a rush of ratifications. Hawaii ratified first within an hour of passage by Congress. The first year, it was more than 20 states that ratified. And then it kind of slowed down, and there was a bit of a backlash, which was spearheaded, I think, at least in its front sense, by Phyllis Schlafly and Stop ERA. And we can talk more about that. But basically, the law was changed to extend the deadline from 7 to 10 years. But still, at the end of the 10 years in 1982, we were just 3 states short. So actually, we came really close. 35 out of the 38 states needed ratified the ERA. And according to Ellie Smeal and women who really worked so hard in that campaign, it literally, in all the states, was just a handful of votes that stopped the ERA from being ratified, just a handful. So it came really, really close. And in terms of why it failed, you just have to look at the arguments, and you see that basically there was a mobilization of fear on many fronts. Now, I think those fears look pretty ludicrous, and if you want, I can just outline what a few of them were. But
go ahead.
Things like women in the military, there was a huge fear of women in combat, and now it's completely reversed. Women have been fighting for the right to be in combat. They've gotten the right to serve in combat because they understand that's part of what being in the military means. It affects their career advancement, and they want to serve their country on an equal basis. So I don't think there's any fear left of women in combat.
There was toilets is the scariest thing.
Right, huge fear of women of single-sex, of unisex bathrooms. And I don't know why that is, because I think we've always had unisex bathrooms on airplanes and elsewhere, but for some reason, it was just a huge fear. No one's been able to really explain that one to me, but I do think it's gone, whatever it was. And I think the fundamental fear that I have come across researching all of this is the fear that women would lose the security they have in marriage, that a woman's place is in the home, and she's going to lose all of the financial security that she has through marriage. And I think that women never really had that security, and a lot of them learned it the hard way, actually, that having independent education and employment is probably more secure than marriage. But I think there was just this huge fear that we're going to break up the family. And in fact, the ERA had many ways in which it would have helped women in the household to get their contribution to the family valued and contribute equally and recognized equally. But I think that also is really something of the past. I think it's very comfortable for people understanding women have a role in the workplace. That's an appropriate place for women to be. And all those stereotypes that kept the ERA from moving forward are pretty much gone. I think men have changed a lot, as much as women or more in the past few decades, and they are beginning to see the challenges of childcare and see that need and all the things that fell down along sexual stereotype lines, I think, have changed quite a lot. So a lot of it's changed, but basically the other big fear I should mention was, it wasn't even like a real fear. It was as if we get the ERA, oh my God, the next thing we're going to have is gay marriage. We can't have that. That was just like unthinkable. It wasn't even like a real thing. It was just a specter of doom. And now, of course, we have a constitutional right. So I think all the fears are pretty much gone.
Wow. Okay. So I want to turn it over to Faye, but first I want you to just give us the basic mechanics of what's next. If we were 3 states short in 82 when the extension expired, is that something that can be? Do those ratifications still stand, or do we have to start over with all the states?
So that's a great question, and there are 2 different approaches now in Congress. Some people want to just remove the deadline, go back and get Congress to vote again to remove the deadline, and then there's a legal question about whether you can remove the deadline after it's expired, and whether you have to do that by a majority vote or a 2/3 vote. But there's one line of thinking that pursues that because it would seem like a shortcut if that could work. And then other people who feel like they don't want to trust the Supreme Court ultimately with that decision are just starting over with a new ERA. And Carolyn Maloney, who's introduced the new ERA, has actually added a sentence that women shall have equal rights in the United States and all territories subject to its jurisdiction. And the reason she did that is because she really wants to see the word women in the Constitution. It's not there. And I think it's much broader language that would give us more protection. So the idea is, if you're going to start over, let's get a stronger language. But starting over would be the process I described, where you get 2/3 a vote in each House of Congress, and then it goes to the states for ratification.
So are there groups in each state prepared or I imagine that you as the coalition are already sort of mapping out a strategy for state-by-state campaign?
Well, we're focusing primarily on Congress right now, and our goal would be to get the ERA passed, a new ERA passed, without a deadline. So that way, because I think if we hadn't had a deadline, we would already be there. It was only 3 more states. That's the new ERA. On the 3-state approach, there's always been a sense, I think, that the 3 most likely states would be Illinois, Florida, and Virginia. And there have been moves in those states. There have even been votes in one or the other house in those states. But at the federal level, that would mean trying to get the bill that's sponsored primarily by Ben Cardin in the Senate and by Jackie Spear in the House that says we're going to remove the deadline. And then that creates a legal framework that would make it possible to consider just getting 3 additional states.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have a picture. Faye,
Yes.
what about, in terms of strategy, what do you see? What do you see as the priorities? Is the Congress of Black Women, is that a big campaign? Is this going to be a mobilization state by state? How are you seeing this?
Well, I think first of all, we have to look at strengthening our entire coalition. And the first thing that the entire coalition needs to do is to add a lot more color than we had in the 1970s. I know I'm off color, but we need to add all people, all women and men. There are a lot more men who are supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment now than perhaps we had in the 1970s. So I think what we have to look at is not just taking the Equal Rights Amendment, but look at each other's issues. For instance, if women of color need to have immigration reform, women of color need to have us do something about voter suppression, I think we all need to come together and talk about how we can be mutually supportive of each other, because it becomes difficult for me as a black woman to get black women who always vote in our best interest. By the way, we vote in the 97, 98 percentile of those things that are in the best interest of women and our families. But more of us need to register to vote. But when we do vote, we know how to vote. So we need to help each other increase the voting of all women. I think Hispanic women have been voting in their best interest a lot more than in the past. So I think they would still do that. But we need all women doing that and being mutually supportive all along of each other's issues. In the case of women of color, we have more to think about, more to work on than, quote, what some people think of as a woman's issue. And I don't think the Equal Rights Amendment is just a woman's issue. I think it is an issue for all of us. So we need to recruit more men to be involved with us all along, and don't wait. Let's do it up front. Let's make sure that we're welcoming everybody into this, because it does impact all members of a family. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I think we should also never stop saying that Equal Rights Amendment is not just a woman's issue, because it is not. And I think all of us need to encourage each other in diverse groups to visit our members of Congress and let them know that we need them to put it on the table, tell us where they are on this issue. And especially people who are now running for office, because what happens is people begin to tell us, oh yeah, they'll do anything. But we need to hold them accountable and see, do a checklist of how they're actually voting on our issues. But if we haven't even told them what the issues are that are important to us, then we can't expect to hold them accountable for those. So back in the districts, We need to have groups of people who are visiting Congress people or people who are running for office. We need to enlist the support of the males in the family, our uncles, personally. We need to support our dads, our brothers, our sons, everybody, so that they're with us. And we should keep records of it. Don't just assume that the men in our families are going to be with us. We need to put them on record as with us. We need to enlist the support of every candidate who's running for any office, not just for Congress, because all of these other offices also impact what happens with women in cities and counties and these small towns. And we need to speak out on the causes of non-white women. One of the complaints I hear a lot is that white women tend to support women's issues, but then they don't think in terms of things that happen to black women or Hispanic women. For instance, in McKinney, Texas recently, I had lots of people who called me and said, when are they going to say something about the young woman who was abused by the police officer there? And it is not in meanness. It is meaning that we need each other, and we need to understand that. And it's more than on just issues that just are about women. We need to be more vocal on issues of inequality for everyone in our society. There are some people who can go along with certain issues, but they can't on others. But every time they have an issue, they want us to be with them. Yeah. And then we more of us have just got to vote on our own best interests and understand that we're all impacted by anything that discriminates against anyone, not just against women. I think Bella Abzug said it best in 1995 when she said, never underestimate how important this issue is. And never hesitate to tell the truth about it, no matter on whom it falls, and then never, never, never give in or give up. Sometimes we get discouraged when we are trying to make something happen. I know the women in 1970 must have been discouraged at the time, but we have to learn to get over it real fast and get up and get back in the game.
I totally agree with you. And during, after the horrible shooting in Charleston, the massacre in Charleston, there was an article that I saw that really struck me as very important. One of the things that the shooter said in the church to the victims was, you black men are raping our women.
Yes.
And the specter of black violence against white women is something that is there. It is present. It is part of white male superiority complex that is not being challenged adequately by us as a collective. That this is deep in the psyche, and it's going to take major surgery to remove it from the white male psyche of I think a sadly large number of people in this country. It's we know that the power of images. The Rodney King jury who acquitted because of this image of a big black man, who was being violent, who they thought as being violent when he was the one laying on the ground and getting beat up. Yes. This I think you're absolutely right that in order for this idea of equality to really resonate with everyone, that we have to understand that there are different dimensions and different size mountains for different communities that have to be climbed.
And as we looked at what happened in Charleston and all of South Carolina, I think that can give us hope, because we did see a lot more cooperative efforts there on the problems there, and they're beginning to move. They're beginning to make progress, and I think that should be a lesson to all of us. You can do it if you try, but you've got to try, and you've just got to never give up if you think it's an important issue. So I think this time is going to be different, because, as I said, we have men up front who are supporting us. We have women of all races and cultures, but we want to keep it that way. We want to, have leading roles so that our voices are heard, because no one can tell our story, meaning as a black woman or as a Hispanic woman or a Native American woman. No one can tell our stories as we can tell them. So we want to be involved. We want to make the Equal Rights Amendment happen, but we need to be together and we need to be mutually supportive of each other's issues in other respects, not just on the Equal Rights Amendment. It's something I truly want to happen. I have been there. I have committed myself to work as hard as I must to talk with as many people as I must. But we need to get more than me. Just me won't do it.
That's right. And Kamala, yesterday you talked about this a bit, about how these issues are interrelated, and how all of the non-white communities that are affected, how this intersects with all of those issues. Do you want to talk about that, and about why it is that young people are now becoming more interested in this?
Yes. I want to say that from my point of view, this is going to be really easy. I want to give people the sense that I truly believe that this is a no-brainer. This is actually already done. The fact of the matter is that everybody born after 1982 has no idea what we're talking about. And if they did know, they would be completely horrified and immediately put a stop to it. Right now, the demographic from about age 15 to about 35 is, I believe, close to 100% in the dark on this. And I believe that by simply raising awareness in a very sort of light fashion, in a, oh my God, this is ridiculous way, that we will have so much support that we won't know what to do with it. We look at the gay marriage issue. That affected maybe a 10% portion of the population, but the principle behind it was something that unified everybody. We have a so much easier situation here in that we have 51% of the population and 76% of whom already believe we have these rights. 96% believe we should. So to my mind, the media is the key. We saw with television, it took them 10 years to get to 1 million viewers. Facebook took 9 months to get to 500 million users. So we don't have to do phone trees. We don't have to mimeograph flyers. We don't have to do anything. We have the tools to solve this really quickly, really economically, and in a sense of fun and lightness and happiness about who we are. We're Americans. We have a wonderful country that believes in certain things. We all believe them, and once we get this for ourselves, we'll be able to help women all over the world. I want to connect this back to them, because a lot of young women think, you know what, I'm pretty okay. I'm not that oppressed. And I want to make clear to them that you may feel that way. I think at some point in your life you will hit on a moment where you will see this discrimination, but maybe you won't. But whatever the case may be, I know that you don't want to see what's happening to women all over the world, with acid thrown in their face, with genital mutilation, with being shot in the head for talking to a man that isn't their family member. I know that all young people want to stop that. And the way that you can stop that is by getting behind the Equal Rights Amendment, because once we clean our own house, then we have the moral authority to go out into the world and be the guy with the big stick. Right now, we are one of the only countries in the entire world, one of 7 countries, that will not sign the Comprehensive Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It's called CEDAW. It's an international treaty, and we won't sign it. Why is that? Well, Jessica believes that it's because we won't get this ERA done, and then later they're going to say, wait, you're violating international law by discriminating against women, and the U.S. government doesn't want that on their, people coming at them with that, so they don't want to sign the treaty. So Jessica says, and I agree, okay, we'll clean house here first. We'll get this one done, and then we can look out and help everybody else. But women are so used to helping others and thinking that it's rude to take the time and make the effort to help ourselves. But what I would say is that as soon as we help ourselves, the world is our oyster in terms of helping others. right now we don't have the power to truly do what's in our hearts and minds to do. We don't have the way to fix the ecology, to fix the economy. We can do all of these things, and we are the global superpower. Women are the global superpower. We need the Equal Rights Amendment to get to the point where we can save the world.
Well, that's a good mandate. I like that a lot. So talk about your film, Kamala. We're entering our action items phase of the discussion. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to not lose the chance to give people some ideas about how they can get involved. So talk about your film, what you hope it will achieve, and how people can get involved.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to say to please, if you're listening to this, please go to equalmeansequal.com and sign up. I say this for several reasons. Number one is I will not ask you for $1, ever. What I want to prove is to distributors and politicians and stakeholders out there that women care about this. And if they don't see the numbers, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever, they're not going to believe us. We are here and we care, and we have to show that. I've spent 6 years making this movie. I've talked to over 110 women and men about this issue, and there is no doubt in my mind that until we fix the foundation of this country, we are building our dreams on quicksand. So however tall the building is, Carly Fiorino's building looks beautiful from the exterior, right? But it's built on a shaky foundation. And I really cannot emphasize enough that if all of us get together on this one issue, it will raise all boats. There is no doubt about it. So if we can just say as a group, as a coalition, as a country, that we believe in equal rights for all people, and we are going to end any debate about that now, I think that in 10 or 20 years we will be living in a world that is so much better. And if we don't, I have a feeling that in 20 years what we call life is not going to be what we want. It's just getting really ugly out there.
So go to equalmeansequal.com, sign up to get updates about the film, screenings, ways to be involved. That's really excellent because these days there's so much going on, so many issues, so much noise. It's really important to have a way to break through all that noise and have something very compelling like a film to get people galvanized. And so I think that's fantastic. Jessica, can you talk to us for a few minutes about just how you see people being able to help the new campaign?
Well, I think there's so much that everyone can do. I mean, it starts with breaking that silence and correcting a lot of the misinformation, but there are also several really concrete actions that we're asking people to take. So the first one is write to your members of Congress and get them on board. And on our website, which is eracoalition.org, you can put in your zip code and find out whether your representatives and your senators have already supported the ERA in Congress or not. And if they've co-sponsored it, you should thank them for doing that and ask them to reach out to their colleagues. And if they haven't co-sponsored it, you should ask them why not and get them on board. So that's one very concrete thing. And also on our website, we have a pledge. We're asking people to take the pledge, which is that they will not support any candidates for election who don't support the Equal Rights Amendment. And we think that's really important, that they need to let their candidates know this is an issue of importance to us. Last week, Meryl Streep wrote a letter personally to every single member of Congress asking them to get on board. So we're asking people to join her. Just get those letters flooding in there and let people know that we're watching them and that we want them to support the ERA. Whichever strategy they like, our view is one way or another, we want to see the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution.
Well, that's fantastic to have somebody like Meryl Streep writing to every member of Congress. I think that's a great model. Is she going to stay involved going forward, do you think?
Absolutely. She's one of many celebrities that have publicly stated their support, and again on our website is a list of all of the celebrities that have come out for the ERA. It's an easy thing for people to do, and I think, as Cami said, it's a no-brainer. But we want to really just show the breadth and width of support and depth of support for this, and the urgency of it. I think the real challenge we have is to get it on the radar screen. And once we get it on there, I agree with Cami, it'll just shoot right through.
I think the story, before I turn to Dr. Fay to close us out, one story you told, Jessica, could you tell it about a member of Congress who told a story about his mother and why a Republican member of Congress who said he's supporting the ERA because of what happened to his mother in a job discrimination situation? You told me a story about this once. There was a...
Well, one of the co-sponsors, it's a very bipartisan effort, and Cynthia Lummis, a representative from Wyoming, has teamed up with Carolyn Maloney, and she herself has talked about the discrimination that she was subjected to. As she tells it, when she graduated from college and she went to look for a job in a bank, they told her, you can't be a loan officer because men don't like to ask women for money. So she started with that very personal feeling of discrimination, but also she's very proud of her state. Wyoming was the first state to give women the right to vote. And I think even though she's a really conservative Tea Party Republican, she's joined up with a really progressive Democrat, Carolyn Maloney, and they're just showing everybody that this is not about partisan politics. This is about fundamental human rights.
Wonderful. Well, that's a great story. And Dr. Fay Williams, close us out. Tell us, how can we help? How can our viewers get involved in all the ways that you mentioned before?
Well, first of all, we don't want to overwhelm people. We want to give them things that are doable, and they're more likely to do it. We want to enlist the help of labor, of churches. I mean, you know, just every place that we think we can get support. And it's our responsibility, as Kamala said, to tell that history to people of what happened. The young women who don't know about all of the things that happened in the 70s and what it took to get the Voting Rights Amendment for women, and also tell them some of the civil rights stories. As I said earlier, there are women who come to me still who are saying, I have more education, I have more experience than many men. Men come in and can get the promotions, some of them coming from the outside, and then to add insult to injury, as a woman who's been there, I have to train them how to do my job. They get the job, and I don't. We don't want that to continue to happen, but we have to tell these stories. We have to give people the history. And as the singer Al Green would say, when we come together and form these coalitions, let's stay together, because ultimately that's how we win, is by staying together, by hanging in there and continuing to listen to and tell each other's stories and tell our own stories.
I think maybe we could make that our theme song. It's one of my favorite songs. Let's stay together.
Okay. And what amazing grace that would be.
But you know, it would be in competition maybe with RESPECT. That might be another one up for the contest there.
And just a quick coda, I want to say that Jeanette Rankin, who was our first congresswoman, she was elected in 1917 before we had the vote. She said, men and women are like right and left hands. It doesn't make sense not to use both.
All right.
There you go. That's a wonderful note to end it on. Thanks, everyone, for joining our roundtable. Go to our website, and that's forumonwomen.cartercenter.org, where you will be able to find under the roundtables, under previous roundtables, you'll be able to see this archived discussion. And in the blog section, we will post a blog article that has all of the links to some of the items and content, especially Kamala's film coming out, a wonderful trailer. It's a really great trailer. It'll get you excited, get you involved. And the articles that we mentioned, we'll get those up for everyone to see and share. And thanks to our panelists, and let's do this again in 6 months or so we can see where we are with everything.
Thank you
Thanks so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks.